This is the Kratom Science Journal Club with Dr. Jonathan Cachet, neuroscientist and expert in psychopharmacology. In each episode, we discuss an article in a peer-reviewed journal. I'm your host, Brian Gallagher, blog and social media writer for KratomScience.com, your source for all things Kratom. In the largest study of its kind, researchers from Thailand found that Kratom promotes healthy cholesterol levels. We'll take a look at that study today on Journal Club. This was high serum, high density lipoprotein and low serum triglycerides in Kratom users, a study of Kratom users in Thailand. They basically took 581 individuals, 18 and above. Half of them were Kratom users, half of them were control group, and they measured their cholesterol level. And these are all people who live in the Nam Phu sub-district in Thailand, where it's been legal to use Kratom as like a traditional tea since 2017. It was called the Kratom Law, and it allowed people in that particular district to use Kratom. But now in Thailand, Kratom's legal everywhere. It's still illegal to traffic. I just saw an article where a guy got busted, but he also had meth and everything, but part of his bust was like, you know, a kilo of Kratom leaves or something. So it's kind of still quasi illegal there. I think you have to have special licenses to sell it and consume it, and they're putting laws together to license agriculture of it there. So Kratom agriculture hasn't started yet, and that may even take like 5 years to get going, because it takes that long to get the alkaloid levels right in the plant for it to be a good product.
Well, yeah. Well, it just goes to show you that Kratom use is only dangerous in the context of poly drug use. For that guy that got busted, he also had
yeah, really
crystal methamphetamines with him. So that holds true today.
Yeah. Poly drug trafficking is not advised. So this is, and one other thing I pointed out, they use the phrase traditional use of Kratom 8 times in the paper, because they're using freshly used, they're brewing it into a tea, or they're chewing it like chewing tobacco and spitting it out. People in Thailand, as far as I know, not traditionally anyway, dry Kratom and use the powder like we do here. So the leaves, there's probably a lower level of 7-hydroxymetragynine, because that comes a little bit from the oxidization process. But in Thailand, I hear the Thai Kratom has like a much higher mitragynine content there, so it metabolizes into 7-hydroxy, so they probably get a similar effect.
Yeah, it ends up metabolizing, and then they get higher levels of the 7-hydroxy within the blood concentration. Yeah, and I think, you know, one of the papers we reviewed previously basically goes to show that the fresher their Kratom leaves are, the higher the mitragynine alkaloid levels are.
I think this is the biggest study that I've seen that took a bunch of participants and measured their cholesterol levels. The study compared the serum lipid profile of Kratom users and non-users, consisted of 581 individuals, 18 and above. Binary logistic regression was used to determine an association between Kratom use and serum lipid level. What do they mean by binary logistic regression?
So they're just looking at two variables in the logistic regression statistic. So, the old correlation versus regression. Correlation does not equal causation, whereas in a logistical or linear regression, we do establish some sort of causation. So what comes first and how that affects the dependent variables. And with a study this size, we're almost going on 600 total N for this. So I think you're right in pointing out that this is one of the biggest studies looking at how kratom use affects triglyceride levels. And yeah, so the statistical significance is just used through linear regression.
They had higher levels of HDL, which is known as the good cholesterol, and lower levels of triglycerides, which are fats from the food we eat that are carried in the blood. It says their LDL, which is the bad cholesterol, was about equal. There was a previous smaller study that also found lower LDL, but they had, in general, they had higher HDL and lower triglycerides, which is good. Good for heart health.
Well, so I was just going to lay out that. So if we're looking at a strategy for the prevention of coronary heart disease, so the basically the experts lay out guidelines. So you want your total cholesterol to be less than 200 milligrams per DL. You want your LDL cholesterol to be less than 100. You want your total triglycerides to be less than 150, and then where does it say? It doesn't say HDL on there, but basically elevated or higher levels of HDL, the quote good cholesterol, is a strategy for the prevention of coronary heart disease. So I think that there's a lot of back and forth in terms of what's good cholesterol, what's bad cholesterol. Is cholesterol and blood triglycerides influenced by genetics or environment? And it sort of seems to be switching, with the times. It's sort of like, a glass of wine is good for you, a glass of wine is bad for you. They sort of go back and forth. But in general, I think this is one of the first studies of kratom with this amount of people that essentially shows that it can lead to elevated levels of the HDL, or at least it's not bringing the HDL levels down.
Yeah, it also says kratom users included a higher proportion of males, usually, which is in those countries, it's usually men who drink more kratom. But it also said a higher proportion of smokers and drinkers who exercise less. So it's kind of encouraging that they showed better cholesterol numbers than the control group, because they are also
that was my only red highlight, to say, okay, well, shoot, the non-users are exercising more, so you would suspect that the more exercise leads to healthier, blood lipid levels. But in this case, that necessarily wasn't the case. And then so current drinking, current smoking, higher BLM in the non-users, or BMI. I'm sorry, BMI. These are all factors that you would lead to believe, okay, well, the non-users essentially are set up for sort of having lower or healthier blood lipid levels. But then they to the statistical analysis they could compare the effects of sort of like drinking or BMI separate from that of the use of kratom, and the statistical relationship of being significant still stands. The kratom users had higher HDL levels, and then what was it for triglycerides were unaffected. Let's pull up the other ones here, but overall, kratom users included a higher proportion of males, smokers, and drinkers. Had lower BMI and exercised less. All factors that would be working against healthier or better profile of HDL and the blood lipids. But that didn't seem to flush out at the end.
Yeah, it says, according to the Mann-Whitney U test, the level of triglycerides was significantly lower in kratom users. Level of HDL was significantly higher in kratom users, but there was no difference for total cholesterol and LDL. Do you know what the Mann-Whitney U test is?
So it's a I don't know if I'll know, for the statisticians in the audience, I don't know if I'll know the exact difference, but it's sort of a way to compare two different groups in a subsample where the distribution isn't normal. We use the Mann-Whitney U test in comparing like drug-treated zebrafish versus non-drug-treated zebrafish, and the way that the sort of variables laid out in terms of a normal distribution was not normal, I think non-parametric. And so then you just use the Mann-Whitney U test to reach that statistical significance.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the chart, and it was current smokers. There was 154 out of 285 kratom users that were smokers. So it's like 54%. And the non-users, only 39 out of 296 smoked. Drinkers, the kratom users were 74 out of 285, and the non-users only drank 23 out of 296, and they exercised more. 3 days a week, 114 out of 296 of the non-users. Kratom users only exercise 80 users out of 285. It's kind of funny. Both groups had 25 diabetics out of all of them. Anti-hyperlipidemic treatment, I guess that's like if they have cholesterol medication.
Yeah, they're taking cholesterol meds.
Yeah.
You know, I think I'm trying to remember back like 2-3 years ago when this was a pretty big discussion amongst kratom users. And there was, essentially the medical establishment, I use in air quotations, were essentially, saying that the long-term effects of kratom use are unknown. They were essentially trying to establish potential health risks or medical risks beyond what could be considered like addiction or overdose, because we had established that compared to the traditional opiates, kratom seems to be a healthier, more natural alternative with less addiction potential and basically no overdose potential in terms of respiratory depression. And so I'm remembering, and it's a bit hazy, but like on Reddit forums dedicated to kratom users, people would they'd come back after they have like their yearly checkups, and they would post like 5-year kratom user, just had my daily checkup, all blood work is normal. And I think in particular there was a subset of, I guess there was some initial early indication that kratom use could lead to elevated levels of cholesterol and then increase your risk of coronary heart disease. And they go over a few of the studies, I think down here at the bottom, about studies where, there basically was studies that said kratom use can increase your triglycerides. It can have no effect on your triglycerides, or it can increase your LDL, the quote unquote bad cholesterol. I don't think any of those previous studies, and help me if I'm misremembering, Brian, but did you go in and look to see what the sort of the subject numbers were for those previous studies?
Yeah, I have a link to it. That's the one that found lower LDL. So that was also a positive, and that was 100. There's 200 participants, 100 kratom users, and 100 who don't use kratom.
And was that in Thailand as well?
This was
maybe Malaysia.
It might have been, Darshan Singh worked on it, so it was probably Malaysia. And they actually found good cholesterol numbers, but it was that was only 200, and I think at that point that was the biggest one, because this was just from last year, so I remember that as being pretty new, and I was like, wow, that's like 200 people. That's pretty good, because I think the previous ones were probably 50 or something, so they just kept getting bigger, and like the larger the group, the more positive cholesterol effects they're finding.
And this one too, so the study that we're looking at now finds significant association between kratom use and low triglyceride level and high HDL. These findings took into account certain variables that may have confounding effects, including sex, age, BMI, smoking status, alcohol consumption, and exercise. Most of this paper is sort of an exercise in proper statistical analysis, but by including those variables and the effect that they may have, and still finding that significant association between kratom use and low triglyceride and high HDL, I think that sort of sets this paper apart, both in terms of size and the statistical analysis performed. Well, so I have been taking statins for high cholesterol levels since you can go back into my blood work levels down to like middle school, and I've had high cholesterol. It's something that I think runs from my father's mother's side of things, and I think it's genetic. And so I've experienced just in my lifetime them sort of saying like, oh, you got to stop eating ice cream. You got to take these statins. You got to bring your levels down. And regardless of the dietary choices I made or the type of statins I was on, the levels were always high. And this is way before any personal kratom use. And so it got to the point where my doctors were essentially just like, look, maybe you run high, and that's just sort of your baseline. And the more we learn about cholesterol, the more we sort of are maybe sometimes landing on people are just sort of have elevated levels, and that's what's normal for them. So it's hard to rule out, in these anecdotal posts of N equals 1, it would be very surprising if that person that just posted said, oh, I had a stroke and my cholesterol levels are through the roof, but were you controlling for all the other variables? And you really can't necessarily account for that unless you have something like, 600 some subjects where you're running the statistical analysis on.
Yeah, really. I mean, I noticed on Reddit, like, kratom is blamed for every single thing that happens.
Yeah.
I think hair loss is a significant one, but I don't know if it's caused by kratom or by people doing tons of kratom with toxic metals in it, or since the average kratom user is about middle-aged, it's just them getting older. So there's a lot of things like I just use kratom, and this happens, so therefore is it the kratom? Like.
Let me roll through the previous studies here. So we have
go ahead.
2020, 2018. So it says, our findings in regards to the association between kratom use and low triglyceride levels differs from previous studies by Ferris and Singh. So there was no association found in that study. This was first published in 2018, and then I think revisited in 2020. An observed positive relationship between kratom use and HDL levels is consistent with the results of Singh 2018, which showed kratom users had higher HDL levels compared to the control group, but contradicts that of Ferris and Aman, which showed the existence of no such associations. So I had thought that there were previous studies that basically showed that kratom does in fact lead to like increased coronary heart disease through its effect on blood lipid levels. But it seems like at least the studies that are cited here, there was no association, or it supports this association with HDL. So the good cholesterol. See if I can see anything else mentioned, but I thought that was the only section where it went through and compared it to previous. And it doesn't look like it. It doesn't look like it. Looks like, so I'm wondering where essentially this scare came from. Maybe up in the introduction, they mention it a little bit more. Okay, yeah, small number of studies have indicated that kratom use may have an effect on serum lipid profile, so blood lipids. Study of 58 kratom users and 19 healthy controls. So you're comparing roughly 60 users to 20 healthy controls. It's not very statistically, equal populations. Yeah. Saw that the use of kratom was associated with an increase in HDL, both in the short-term and long-term users. That was the 2018 study. Recent study involving 100 kratom users and 100 healthy controls kratom users were found to have a slightly lower level of LDL and total cholesterol, which would be less risk for coronary heart disease. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't necessarily, I think maybe the what I'm remembering is sort of the scare with cholesterol and blood lipids and kratom use have almost always been based on, passive glancing through a reading of these anecdotal reports posted to Reddit where, who knows? It could have been dietary changes. It could have just been changes associated with age and you see cholesterol increase, or you could be sort of like me in that you just are running higher levels of these lipids in your blood than what is considered, normal within the normal range.
Yeah. And there was this other section about antioxidants that may be what's contributing to the lower cholesterol. Anthocyanins are a class of compounds with antioxidant effects commonly found in many kinds of vegetables and fruits, such as eggplants, blueberries, blackberries, black raspberries. I think I pointed out that it's not necessarily kratom in and of itself that's lowering the cholesterol. It's just the fact that it's a green leaf, and those are healthy. And if somebody's consuming a lot of it, how many leaves per day or whatever they are consuming in Thailand, then it's just a healthy vegetable in general. But it points out that there's a lot of fruits and vegetables where you can get the same kind of antioxidant effects at least. Yeah, so if like they were drinking blackberry tea every day or eating like a bucket of blackberries every day, that it might have the same positive effect.
I'm trying to figure out, were any of the authors of this study on or within the same group as these previous studies? Like, is it the same research group?
I know it's not the one with the 100 and 100, because I think that was University of Malaysia, and I think it was Malaysian participants. So I think it's Laic University in Thailand. I'm probably not pronouncing that right at all.
Yeah, this is a Thailand research group at University in Thailand. The 3 study authors. Looks like it was supported by a Center for Addiction Studies, the Thailand Office of Narcotics, and the university that I think you pronounce it well enough for me.
Laic? Why Lailac? Why Lailac?
Yeah. But it doesn't seem that this group was, I think it's probably an association to some extent in that they're in the same field, but it doesn't look like this particular group is coming up in any of the previous studies. I wonder if this is the first HIV, methamphetamine. So it looks like the group is primarily focused on drug sociological research, but not necessarily particularly in kratom. One of the notes I had that I was curious about is as they're describing the study design and the study participants, I'm wondering if this group was collected as part of any of the other epidemiological studies that they were doing, maybe on other drugs, but there's nothing here that says if they were compensated for their participation in this study at all. I don't know, I don't know whether or not it sort of is like I'm not trying to say or suggest that it's a smoking gun in any way, but usually in these types of analysis, participants were compensated for their travel or something like that. Like, did the researchers go out into these communities and then just get people to fill out these surveys and then allow them to collect a blood sample and not get anything for that? Especially, there were, in order to get a good blood sample and do the blood lipids, you don't want them to drink about 12 hours before the collection of the blood. So it's just interesting that was not mentioned.
Yeah, it said they were instructed to refrain from food 8 p.m. the day before, because then they come in at 8 p.m. Blood collection was conducted at the Ban Yang Ung Public Health Promoting Hospital. They gave 3 milliliters of blood. And these were all people in that district, the Nam Food District, where it's actually legal to consume kratom. Assuming this hospital is close to that location or in that location.
I did just a quick Google to see where that location was. If there's anything so the Nam Phu sub-district. It looks like of the districts in this area in Thailand, this is the most heavily populated. So I wonder if it has the state capital, if there's a district capital, but overall, this is the most densely populated area of Thailand.
Yeah, I was actually trying to look that up when I wrote a little blog post about this article, because it's like a sub-district within a larger district where kratom is legal, and there must be a lot of kratom trees that grow around there. That's kind of another thing I'm wondering with the legality now, is how many wild trees are left, and can people just start picking them and selling them to people online? I'm sure that's going to happen as soon as they stop cracking down on possession or whatever the laws are going to be.
I know I get plenty of DMs. I can't imagine what the Kratom Science Twitter DM looks like with exporters and importers there. It's sort of I'm getting them on LinkedIn now.
Oh, really? Oh, man.
I think that's a good question on whether to what degree is the is the space commercialized over there now? I just don't know the answer. It'd be interesting for any listeners that we have that live over there in that area. If you're getting access to this, is quote unquote traditional use. Like, I think to our Western minds that might seem like sort of very uncommercialized, very like go pick your leaves in the morning, make your tea, and then serve it. But like maybe all of the wild kratom trees are sort of now at least maintained or curated by farmers or people out in the field, and that they have rows of this stuff, and that the farmers then bring in bulk leaf to like a restaurant or like a tea bar or a coffee bar or some sort of commercial place where then it's made in big batches and then handed out, versus like sort of made on someone's back porch for personal use only. It'd be interesting to learn more about that. To what extent traditional use sort of covers commercialization to any degree.
There was 285 users that they found in this study. I mean, I'm sure they all don't have a tree in their backyard, so
right.
Yeah, in this district where it's legal, that'd be interesting to see how it's sold. Yeah, whether if you have to go to like a bar somewhere, or they just in Thailand in Malaysia, Darshan Singh was telling me they basically made big pots of it and they put it in plastic bags, like not even Ziploc bags. They just like tie plastic bags with, and they call it juice, the kratom juice. So it's just like cold tea, and they sell it in plastic bags like that. But it's legal and it's illegal in Malaysia. So I'm not sure, like, if in Thailand, if that's the same kind of thing that goes on. I know when Hamilton went there, he was in Thailand, and the guy they would just like chew the leaves with some sugar and spit it out for like a cough or something. That whole episode was about how they eradicated a lot of the trees after
the wild grown trees.
Yeah, and so it became illegal there, and I think it was like 1943, 46, somewhere around there. The government was in the business of collecting a lot of taxes from opium sellers and opium dens and opium farms, and they collected a large amount of taxes. So the opium users would start using kratom because they wanted to get off of the opium, and so the government, that's why they outlawed it in the first place. And I think since 2010 they've been trying to. There's been talk about making it medicinal, and medicinal cannabis is now legal in Thailand too, because they've always used marijuana there. Remember, like the Thai stick. Remember, hey man, I got Thai stick.
Right.
It's tied to a stick, man. That's Cheech and Chong.
was the effort to tax the opium producers like a way to? A lot of times in drug enforcement, if you can't go after them directly for the drugs, you'll go after them for taxes. So were they trying to like eradicate the opium commerce through the use of taxes, and then that fell over to kratom?
I don't think they were trying to eradicate the opium. I think they were just collecting a lot of tax on it, and I think it was legal at the time. There, I mean, there's a whole history of opium wars and everything like that, and I'm sure it ties in some like geopolitical way to that. But as far as I know, they like the kratom would get in the way of their tax collection of opium because people stopped using the opium. So they wanted to promote opium in the country, and that's why they outlawed kratom. It was kind of getting in the way of the drugs that they controlled, kind of like kratom might get in the way of prescription drugs today here in America. But,
yeah. Well, so speaking of that, is there any update on the whole FDA efforts, and has anything changed? I mean, I saw that the tweets have sort of seemed to die down, but is that conversation still ongoing?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anything's changed. I think that was just a that was just a show business type seizure that they do every once a year or something. But they haven't seemed to be doing any other kinds of crackdown other than I heard there was a credit card processor that a lot of the vendors were using that also shut down because I think they're doing some other like weird stuff, shady stuff. Thought since the credit card thing cracked down, then it might be indicative of something that the raised level of enforcement. But I'm not seeing any real evidence that that's even connected.
It seems like this is just sort of the annual showboating of, we're still in control, we're watching you type. It doesn't look like they're trying to actually push anything further legislatively at the state or federal level down there.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think so. Not at the federal level, anyway. I haven't been paying attention to the state laws, other than in Oklahoma, the Consumer Protection Act got passed, which is good.
That's good.
Yeah. But I haven't noticed anything about like state bans or anything coming up. There's just like consumer protection acts that are either, the one passed and then some of them are dying in committee or whatever. I don't think that was like a bombshell thing or anything, luckily.
Yeah, just sort of business as usual. Yeah. So,
yeah.
I mean, it was interesting, for those of you who haven't seen the conversation unfold with the Kratom Science Twitter, check that out. But we sort of are documenting the conversation that happened between the Human Health and Services and the former FDA. If you don't know about that, you just want to know that how that conversation unfolded. But I'm glad to hear that, because I haven't heard anything else either, like broadly speaking, of them going above and beyond sort of their normal sort of show of power and taking it from there. And
I mean, and it's weird with the legality in Thailand too, because it's like Kratom cannot be either legal or illegal, because they said they just legalized it. They announced it. It's a big thing. And then I still get like on my Google news search for Kratom, I still get, man arrested in Thailand with meth and Kratom. So why is he even charged with Kratom if it's now legal there? So it's kind of like in quasi-legal limbo in Thailand as well. Indonesia, it's kind of like here, where there's one agency wants to ban it and the rest of the government doesn't, and that agency is their like DEA, which is the BNN in Indonesia. That's like their drug enforcement, and they want it illegal because it'll justify giving them a lot of power and everything, kind of similar to the FDA. I mean, they'll have control of whatever happens to Kratom, which is probably one of their motivations for making it illegal.
Yeah. Political jockeying for purpose and budget.
Yeah, and it has nothing to do with public health. I mean, if they cared about public health, they'd be seizing shipments with salmonella and high levels of toxic metals, which they should do. But they're calling Kratom the adulterant and just seizing it to make it look illegal. So, but we talked about that last time. So I guess what they call for at the end of this study is more research, of course, but they're talking about the mechanism by which Kratom actually, lowers cholesterol or raises good cholesterol. And lowers triglycerides. So this is just a survey, and we don't know the pharmacokinetics of how it actually helps cholesterol.
Right. So they want to explore the mechanisms of action, that how Kratom and its alkaloids are affecting on the blood lipids. And it's interesting here that they lay out, Perhaps this could lead to development of new pharmaceutical products from kratom that help in lowering lipids or the prevention of coronary heart disease or cardiovascular disease. It's interesting. Most papers usually end up saying to explore the development of new pharmaceutical products from kratom related to pain relief or pain management or opiate withdrawal syndrome. This one's particularly saying to check it out a little bit deeper as it relates to the lipids. But yeah, overall, I think this paper was sort of short and sweet, and it was the largest sort of sample size to evaluate the effects of kratom use on blood lipid levels. And what it was demonstrating is that it can lead to higher levels of good cholesterol.
And I was talking about like the antioxidants and other vegetables. I guess I'm just Googling it, but it says antioxidants are thought to prevent the changes that turn cholesterol molecules in the blood into substances that can form plaques in artery walls. So basically, green leaves are healthy in general.
Get your vegetables.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Jonathan Cachet. Catch him on social media at JCACHAT. Please like, subscribe, rate, comment, interact with us. The music is Captain Big Wheel. The song is called Moonrunner. The Kratom Science Journal Club is produced by me, Brian Gallagher, for KratomScience.com. Take care.